Hey guys, it's Matt and Peter here. We're doing a forged engine build for the Starlet. This is a 5 EFE, and we thought while we've got everything apart, we may as well explain where we got the parts from, how much they cost, and some building mistakes I've had in the past and just things that we've changed. So if you've got your 5E or your 4E, they're a different engine. One's obviously 1.3 and one's a 1.5. So the 1.5 we got today, the first thing you want to do when you're looking at building is how much power you're going to make. If you're planning just to run like a CT9 or a TD04, the factory engines are more than capable of 200 horsepower. Once you switch to E85 fuel, of course, change your injectors and get a decent ECU, you know, it's pretty reliable.
on 18 pounds.
If you're trying to push even more than that, I'd be looking at upgrading turbo. I've got a 2867 which I run on the blue twin engine car. This is slightly bigger than like a TD05 turbo, but at the moment I've made 300 horsepower with this on a bone stock engine. So switching to forged stuff not necessarily is going to make you more power. You need to have correct turbo so everything's breathing happy and nice, rather than going to the forged stuff and trying to make big power on the TDO stuff. One reason I know this for fact is a couple of years ago I actually built a pair of forged engine for the car, and I had TD04 turbos on there. Now the tuner told me to stop at 18 psi on the unleaded fuel because I feel that low octane with such high boost, it becomes unstable, and a bad batch of fuel you can easily lead to detonation and problems like that. So even though I had forged engines, I didn't even get 500 kilometers out of these engines. Suspected bad batch of fuel, or you know, I was up around sort of 20 pounds boost. We got some severe detonation there, which has melted the side of the piston there. With that detonation, we also got some bad bearing damage under here as well. You might see that a lot on builds on Starlets, people wondering what's gone wrong. And my belief with this is the turbo is too small. You're getting way too much back pressure. Starts heating the intake air, starts causing detonation, and it's just a cycle that's just going to rattle everything to pieces. So I ended up pulling the engines out and we went back to bone stock 5Es. That's when I upgraded the turbochargers with some advice from some friends, and we then turned over 100 horsepower extra on the same boost, and the car ran reliably for a couple of years. So I was happy with the way the engines are running, and now that we've decided to go back to forged engines again, if anyone saw the build on the blue car about 6 months ago, we forged one engine, and we're making just under 400 horsepower now and 28 pound, and it seems to be awesome. So the first build I did that had the Y-scope pistons and the scat rods, that's pretty much the entry level of piston rods that you can get. The Y-scope pistons were about $800 for 4 delivered. It's been 5 years since I bought them, so I don't know the exact price. And the scat rods, I think they're a Chinese rod that are just branded scat. If you look at the Chinese eBay rods versus scat ones, they look exactly the same dimensionally in size, just one has scat written on it and one doesn't. So that's what we have here. That's what we have here in the old engine, and the reason I'm not going with these anymore is even with that detonation problem, we had some cracks here on the bottom of the skirt there. Can you see that, Peter? Mm. Which I thought maybe the detonation caused the piston to rattle a bit, and wasn't sure about that. I have another piston which was out of an old 4E, which is same piston size, also a Y-scope piston, also has cracks under the skirts. I was in contact as well with a friend from Victoria, Rick Bartley. He's got the 500 horsepower Starlet. Also, his old build had Y-scope pistons and had cracks in the skirts in the exact same spot. So Rick actually gave me the idea and said, hey, I've just gone to an Arias piston, and he said there's a lot more meat around the bottom of the skirt area, which you can see there. The pistons are a little bit more expensive. These were about $1,200 delivered, but just looking around this area, there's a lot more meat there. Saying that, the piston will be a lot heavier, but the Arias has compensated by making the gudgeon pin a little bit shorter, which is a steel pin, so it ends up working out a lighter piston than the Y-scope. So yeah, so that's cool. The reason I've gone away from the scat rods, or the Chinese rods if you want to call them that, the Chinese rods are a little bit wider in this area. See that, Peter? It's a bit skinnier, a bit wider. To fit these into your block, you have to get the die grinder out and do a chamfer in the block. You've got to machine this out to make rod clearance, which is pretty dodgy. I don't really like that. If you buy the spool rods, they bolt straight in. With your rice piston, we've got a stronger piston. We've got a rod that has no modification needed to the block, and that's good. So if you're going to go down the forge track, the first thing you want to do is you can just pull your cylinder head off. Oh, head studs, I'll explain that later. So you want to pull your head off, and then you want to measure what your piston size is. Now most factory style pistons are going to be 74 millimeters. You're going to have 74, 74 and a half, or 75 mil. So you don't want to measure across the top. You want to measure across the skirt area here. And here we have, can you see that? 74 mil piston. If you want to do this the budget way, you can get a 74 mil Arias piston, get the spool rods, sort out your bearing clearances, and you can literally do this while it's all still in the car. You don't have to pull the engine apart and get any machine work done. You can do that. If you want to go to an oversized piston, so here I've chosen a 74.5 mil piston. You then have to pull the engine out. It has to go to a machine shop. You take the pistons there. The machinist, he will work out how big he's got to bore the engine out to. So then with the bore out, the larger pistons can fit in there. So in my opinion, if you're trying to break that 300 horsepower barrier, pull the engine out, get the correct size pistons, get the machine work done. While it's out, you want to get the crank machine so you've got plenty of bearing clearance. You want the bearing clearance on the rod and the mains to be at least 2 to 2.5 thou. From standard, they're about 1.5, so you want to get the crank at least polished or get the clearances open up a little bit. It'll just help everything move easily. While you've got that apart, you can buy, forget the ARP head bolts, go straight to these 4AG head stud kit. I'll put a link in the description of how to install this in your engine, but these are a 1 mil oversized stud. These threads are obviously 1 mil larger. They will not fit into the factory things. So you can take these bolts to the machinist, ask him to drill and tap to suit, and you're one step closer to holding the head down tighter. Again, I'll put the link for that in the description. And on all my builds, I use kinetic head gaskets. If you're in Australia, you can buy these from Outlaw Speed Shop down in Adelaide. They're about $150, but they're labelled as a 3E, not a 4E or a 5E, so it's probably why not many people have been able to find them, and just get the size to suit your bore. You can buy these from America, and that's where I used to buy them from, but they charge about 200 Australian dollars, and then it's about $150 freight just to get it here. So if you're in Australia, just buy them from the Outlaw Speed Shop. There is a place online, it's somewhere in the UK, they sell billet main caps. Now I've never used them. I've been told if you do buy them though, they are a bit pricey. But once you bolt them in, you need to also get the block line honed, which means if there's any imperfections in where the main cap goes to the block, it will make that spot on circle. Then you need to get bearings to suit that. I like just using standard size bearings in all my engine builds. The bearings I use are NDC bearings. They're a Japanese made bearing. Haven't had any problems with them yet. So if you want to go down that track to getting the billet main caps, there's also a 4AG main stud kit you can get, but I haven't gone down that track yet. This seems to work for me. I haven't had a crank fly out the bottom of the engine yet. You've got forged pistons, forged rods, factory crank, standard size bearings, nothing too crazy there. The oversized head studs, if you want to go down that direction, I don't think you're going to hold on to much more than 300 horsepower on the ARP bolts that's supplied, because they're only a factory 9 mil stud, 9 mil thread, so there's not really a lot of clamping load there. I have blown head gaskets in the past trying to go further than that, but we've gone with ARP studs, and the next thing is larger camshafts and the valve train. So these are standard cams. You can find these in 4E and 5E and all that, and you can see the damage on here. Now, one of the previous videos on my channel, again, I'll put a link to that. It says STARLET 10.2 at 139 mile an hour. That had factory valve springs. When we were on the dyno, it didn't matter if we were on 20 pounds of boost or 30 pounds of boost on the stock engine, it would not go over 250 horsepower. So what's happening is the air pressure is coming, even though the intake valve's trying to close, the intake air would just keep opening the valve, stuffs up the whole combustion process, and we could not go over 250 horsepower. I didn't even drive it for very long, just went to a few race meetings, and now we've pulled the rock covering off and had a look. You can actually see the damage it's done from the valve floating and bouncing around on the camshaft. You can see the damage, and I can feel it with my finger, and that's on both camshafts. So the next upgrade, which is a must, is get valve springs. Any more than 250 horsepower, get valve springs. This is Performance Valve Springs. Sounds like a great Chinese name, but it is actually an Australian company. Again, I just bought these on eBay. They're about 220 bucks. And if we put them beside a stock valve spring, a little bit higher. Now I have these springs in the other engine, and we are at nearly 400 horsepower on those springs, so they're more than capable. Once you start going to a really heavy spring, there's theories and stories that you can start actually wearing out the cam lobes. I have pulled the rocker cover off the other engine and checked it, and there's no cam damage, it's spot on. We also have these in the GT as well, so they're a good spring. These cams are stuffed. I don't have a lot of faith in the factory cams, so all my builds get the billet cams. These are an Ivan tyre camshaft. Another Australian company. You can just ring them up, tell them what turbo size you got, tell them your bore and stroke, engine, and they do an electronic calculation and can size up a cam exactly what you want. If you want a bit of a lumpy note, or if you want top end torque or peak horsepower and things like that, they can size up a cam exactly what you need. They are about $1,100. They are expensive, but oodles more torque, and yeah, they seem to work well. I did see that there was a website, Speed Vision. Speed Vision apparently sell cams. I tried to inquire about some about 5 years ago, never got a reply. Looked at a lot of forums and reviews on them, and people were saying that the lobe heights were different sizes and there was a few things wrong with them. I don't know exactly how much they were, but I think those cams were about $800 with a cam gear, but too many odd stories about it, so I just went straight to this company and got the custom set made. You can see here too the difference in lobe size, like they are ginormous. We've got an extra 3 millimeters of lift and a lot more duration. So if the valve's opening further and for longer, it means that we're going to get a lot more air in the cylinder. So quite simply, you just take the gears off, use a press, take the gears off the old cams. The new cams don't come with pins, so I like to get an angle grinder and cut on the side of the pin just to get the meat away, and then the pin with a pair of pliers will literally pop straight out. And you see the same one here. That way you don't damage the pin. So all that. When you try and fit aftermarket camshafts, this is the next problem. You've got to get special shims. So the shim adjustment is the clearance between the top of the lobe and the shim, and you don't want to have it too tight. Again, if it's too tight, the valve could open a little bit, you're going to lose combustion pressure and then essentially lose horsepower. So checking the clearances, let's say your head falls apart and you've got 16 shims all over the place. Here's a shim. And say you've got shims all over the place and you've got no idea. The best way to start is to get a pair of these outside micrometers, and you want to check and see what exact size each shim is. 2.94 millimeters. So this shim is 2.94 millimeters. So you get a texture pen, 2.94. If you don't understand this, the best way to do it is just get a set of those micrometers and just try it. Go around and measure all of them. Once you've got all 16 there, go around and check them all again. The smallest ones, you want to put those all on the exhaust side, because the exhaust side is the side that needs the most clearance. So you put all the small ones on that side and all the larger ones on the intake side. You then go and install your cams. This applies if you've got the aftermarket ones or the standard ones. You go and assemble all those. Once they're in, get a pair of feeler gauges and check all the clearances. So you want the lobe, the valve that you're checking, you want the lobe to be pointing up in the air. So you just turn the camshafts and adjust that. Then you get your feeler gauges and just stick them underneath. It shouldn't be really tight to get under the cam, and if it's like sloppy in room, you just get a thicker feeler gauge and try again. So label all your cylinders, all your valves 1 to 8, intake and exhaust, check all of them, and again, if you're unsure, just go back, check them all again, and by this stage you should have a pretty good idea and understanding of how it all works. So once that works, then you need to size up what shims you need. So the website I use is precisionshims.com, and they're in Australia, and you can just ring them up and say, I want these size shims, this many of this shim, and they put them in an airbag and send them straight over to you. Pop them in and away you go. Clearances for exhaust, you want the shim clearance between the shim and the cam to be between sort of 14 to 16 thou, and you want the intake to be sort of 10 to sort of 14 in around that area. Again, you're better off going looser. The engine might be a little bit more rattlier, but it's better than going too tight and holding a valve open. A lot of people ask me where I get these adjustable cam gears from. I'd never use any other adjustment. I just use the center mark. I just like it because it's anodized and looks cool. Again, this is another eBay thing. They're about 140 bucks, I think. The reason I don't use any of the adjustments is when you adjust one, it's actually adjusting both cams, so you're not actually going to get any sort of crazy gains out of it, so I just leave that as it is. I used to use ATI balances for the RB builds I used to do. Went on the website, had a look. You cannot buy a harmonic balancer from an ATI company. I then found Ross Performance parts, and they sell a harmonic dampener to suit these engines. This was about 650 bucks. It feels actually heavier than the standard unit, but this is meant to be fantastic in getting engine harmonics and funny vibrations out. And it also has really specific marks there for the timing, so that'll come in handy when we're setting it up on the dyno. We can check out those things. Oil pump, just use a factory Toyota oil pump. I don't even know if there's any aftermarket or Chinese ones available, but I just use factory Toyota oil pump. They're about $250. Make sure you get an O-ring to come with that as well. They sell those. And last but not least, the clutch. So I used to use Excedia brass button clutches. Actually, I've got it here, I think. Good for 300 horsepower in my eyes, and probably not anymore. Just a 4-putt clutch. It has springs in there, so it's, you know, a bit of comfort there. You can see this has been slipping quite heavily, but that'll be just off the launches when I'm getting off the line, but when it's driving down the road, it seems to hook up really good. I did have a problem with the company. I had a brand new one of their clutches in the Starlet, and on the dyno, like first pull, we weren't even making 300 horsepower yet, and it was slipping. A few arguments back and forwards, ended up sending the clutch back, and went to this extreme clutch. This clutch here has 530 kilos of clamping load, and we're already at, you know, near 400 horsepower, which at the engine would be, say, 450 horsepower, and it is gripping hard. It feels really, really nice. So it's a little bit more expensive. I think this clutch kit was around $600. Seems to be working fantastic. And then we've got the extreme light and flywheel and the factory flywheel, and this is about $450 just for that.
I accidentally turned it off and on.
When?
Just then.
Oh, just then?
Yeah.
So we've got all the bolt-on parts there. Now you need to worry about your fuel system. The injectors I use to make that 400 horsepower in the blue car, these are a Bosch injector, and they're 1250 cc. And you can get these from Golby's Parts down in Queensland. Yaris coils do not fit down the tubes of these. So these are out of a Kluger, Toyota Kluger V6. The part number on this is 90919-02256. And the bodies of these are small enough that they fit straight down, fit nice. And then when you go and get the rocker cover, I've gone and got these bungs welded on the top of the rocker cover there. So then when you slip the coil down, it fits perfect on there, and you can put an Allen head in there and do them up tight, and that works really nice. Another thing that's really important that you need to have a good think about is the standalone ECU. I hear a lot of people talking about AEM computers and stuff like that. I've never used them before, so I can't comment. I've used Microtech computers on all my builds. They're a very basic computer. They're, in my eyes, probably the sort of bottom line of the market, but they work. Fire injectors, they tell the spark plugs when to work. It's a very basic computer, very easy to install. The software is very easy to get a hold of, good to tinker around with. But if you're trying to go, you know, more extreme, you want to get more data logging and stuff like that, probably go to like a Haltech or a Link ECU, something a bit more high end that has a lot more inputs. You can check fuel pressure sensors and all sorts of stuff. But for what I'm doing, like, this seems to work for me. So obviously once all your parts arrive and it's ready to assemble, you need to you'll get 4 packs of these rings. I like labeling the cylinders 1 to 4 on each one so I don't get them mixed up. And each pack you want to remain on each cylinder. So we've got cylinder 4 here. Separate the oil rings there. We've got second ring, and this is the top ring. So you want to put this in the bore. Your top ring gap, you want that to be between sort of 19 to 23 Any more than that, engine might start breathing a little bit, but that's better than it being too tight. If the ring gaps are too tight and they touch each other, it'll break the top off the piston and do a whole heap of damage. So if you do those top ring gaps between 19 to 23 thou, like it'll be spot on and be perfect. The last engine, the top ring gap was like 24, and the second ring gap, you need to have that large, and the top ring gap was a little bit larger, and still no breathing problem. It's still awesome, but we found this is sort of the sweet spot. So we can take the top ring out, and then we do the same thing with the second ring. You want to put this in exactly the same spot, so you're measuring evenly. 26, there we go. So 26 is tight. It's a little bit excessive, but again, it's better to be a little bit more than a little bit less. If this had severe breathing problems, I could just put a catch can on it, but I haven't had a single engine yet that's pumping all out on the ground and things like that, so that's okay. And first, lift this up. Try and select the top of it, scratch the top of the piston. You can do tape with this if you're unsure. And then I slowly just peel around the edges like this, so I don't scratch it. So there's numbers on the ring. I always put those up. Do it like that, twist it around. Cool. So that's number 1 piston in. I just go around and wipe out the excess oil that's in the inside the cylinder. You don't really need that in there anymore. Cool. So we'll go ahead and do the same to 2, 3, and 4 and assemble that. It's like 5:30 in the afternoon on Friday, and we haven't even started really to do much on this. We need to get all this together, get it all back in the car, get the car running, which luckily we can just copy and paste the tune that's in the rear engine straight into this, which will give us a drivable tune. And then we need to get that over to Keelan to get the car tuned tomorrow morning. So we've got a lot of work to do. Any questions, put them in the comments below. Again, I'll post all those links and things to check out, the head studs and where to get parts from and things like that. And we'll see you guys soon.
Good morning, guys. It's 5:53 in the morning and we're 2 hours away till the dyno tune. We're gonna make it, We're also getting this tune today. I had to pull the turbo and stuff back off this last night. I didn't have a gasket. I've just been driving around with some glue for now, but we're gonna pop that gasket back on, get the turbo and that back on, put the intercooler back on, and we're also gonna get this down there today to get the tune done, so it's a very busy day ahead. But we're here, we're gonna make it.